and welcome back to Getting to the Top, where we interview transformational leaders about their leadership journey. And today I have the spectacular, outstanding, crazy honor of interviewing none other than Anya Ayoung-Chee. Welcome, Anya.
Thank you so much for having me, Racquel. It's a pleasure to be here.
Oh, the pleasure is entirely mine. So let me tell you, I'm sure she's known to all of you, but I'm just going to give you a little bit about who this woman is. She is a fashion designer, social entrepreneur, and creative strategist. In 2008, she competed in the Miss Universe pageant in Vietnam for Trinidad and Tobago. The following year, she launched her first collection, Pilar, named after her younger brother. Several years later, Anya inspired millions. You know, we were all on the edge of our seats when she won season 9 of Project Runway and then launched her Ipanema's women's wear line geared towards the resort market. Her passion has been to leverage her platform to facilitate opportunities for Caribbean creatives, small business owners, and at-risk women. By producing her clothing lines in Trinidad and Tobago, she's able to work with and provide training for local seamstresses to sew for the fashion and carnival industries, thus increasing livelihood streams for these women. She's channeled her love for carnival into designing for the largest band in the Caribbean, Tribe, and was co-creative director of the Lost Tribe in its inaugural year. She simultaneously developed the brand Carnival, which comprised an e-commerce platform that sold Monday wear, a carnival events company, and a production team that curated and supplied carnival costumes for LA, Toronto, Barbados, and Jamaica. This experience segued into her newest venture, Wildflower, a digital festival wear brand and mission-driven fashion technology community that is pioneering NFT and digital fashion space for Caribbean creatives. Having created several businesses and brands over the last 10 years, she's now focused on applying her many learnings to her current and upcoming ventures with an emphasis on finding innovative approaches to merging creativity, social consciousness, and technology with an emphasis on women's economic empowerment. There is nothing to not love there. Everything, I love it. I love it. I love it completely. Welcome, Anya.
Thank you again. Yes, it's a little much. It's a lot, but thank you for that introduction.
No, it's wonderful. And I think, how did you we always start at the beginning, like where did you start and how did you know what you wanted to do next? But you had an unusual start in that you started out as a beauty queen and then sort of had this turn into fashion. So when you were growing up, what did you think you would do?
Yeah, I'm sure in the Caribbean, this is a common question, common answer, but my father was a surgeon or is a surgeon, and I was, decently good at the sciences. And so for a long time, I figured, well, the obvious thing is to do medicine, but I would say by 16 or so, that definitely started to change, because ever since I was a little girl, this also sounds very cliched, I loved fashion, I loved magazines. Was like glued to the TV every Saturday morning for Style with Elsa Clench, because that was the only fashion, content that we could get in the 90s. Yeah, I mean, when I started to really explore the potential of like actually doing what I loved, my mom was the one who helped me to see that, design is a possibility. Growing up in the Caribbean, like I didn't have that many examples back then of designers who were designers as a profession. I mean, of course, there were artists and they were, in the traditional arts, I was very exposed to that. But design was not something I understood professionally, but thankfully my mother really encouraged me. And I always say my father wasn't as keen, but he did pay the bills. So he paid for my tuition to design school, which I think is its own very important aspect, support. And so, yeah, so by about 16 or so, I was on a track to do more of a creative profession. But I still didn't study fashion. I kind of chickened out. I went to New York. I went to this fabulous school. I fell in love with being at school in New York. And I really went to do fashion, but within the first 6 months, I was so homesick. And I just wanted to do something I knew I could do at home. I still didn't have that many examples of fashion designers. There's so many more examples of like graphic designers who work for ad agencies. And I figured, okay, this is safe, you know? So I actually studied graphic design at Parsons. I didn't study fashion.
Oh,
Yeah.
interesting. And so then you know, and how were you discovered for Miss Trinidad and Tobago?
So that had a lot to do, I think, with the fact that I had come home after my brother died. He died in 2007. And I, at the time, was working what I thought was a fabulous job in Soho in New York and, you know, designing packaging for, you know, big brands. And so I wasn't planning to come home, but his death, obviously, you know, as it would, devastated all of us as a family. And I just couldn't survive there in New York without my family, you know? And so I came home and I was just sort of lost, you know? And I think in that period of searching, coupled with the experience of losing him he was very young and I was only 25, I just became really like, I don't know even what to put it into words, but I felt like I had a duty in a sense to live up to the life that he didn't get to live. I had to live mine fully, you know? And I just threw everything out the window and I guess the auditions were coming up. I actually auditioned for the Three Canal show first. God alone knows why, because I cannot sing. Somehow I was cast. Within the first rehearsal, Wendell and Roger were like, I don't think this is gonna work. So
Listen, I would interview for Three Canal any day of the week. I love Three Canal.
they're
Every
amazing.
carnival, Morning Neighbor is my first. That
Oh,
kicks off the
my
carnival
God.
season.
Just thinking about it, that was, and what I did though, I ended up, Mailing kind of plucked me away and she did all the costuming. And she said, okay, you're probably not great as a performer, but you can come and help style the show. And that was my first fashion professional experience, you know? And anyway, the point is, somewhere in that whole mix of like, I was just kind of putting myself out there, I was taking risks, I was taking chances. I was like, I have to live a much fuller life on behalf of Pilar and myself. And yeah, PT Last kind of asked me to consider auditioning. And I really was not a very willing candidate. I struggled with the concept of beauty pageants and you know, all for all the obvious reasons, but I am very patriotic. And so I figured, well, on behalf of Trinidad, you know, there may be something I can do with this. And it turns out I was right. I mean, I continue to hate being a beauty queen, but the platform was really powerful, you know, and I was able to leverage that further after the fact.
He has such a good eye, Peter
Yeah.
Elias, in sort of spotting talent and spotting, you know, beauty. And so,
Yes.
you know, and then Mei Ling as well in sort of choosing you to help style the show,
Yep.
which I think must have been an extraordinary experience.
Oh, extraordinary. I mean, I was so honored. I learned so much from her. And then I went on to sort of ask her formal mentorship when I decided to design a collection for the first time, which also came out of designing for my pageant wardrobe. And Peter was extremely generous in that sense too. He was like, he knew I had a very distinct sense of style, where normally I think he would kind of like shop on behalf of the beauty queens. I was really given a lot of freedom, and I started to co-design with Mei Ling what I wanted to wear at the pageants, and that was really what all started like unfolding, you know. And then I came back from the pageants somewhere that, you know, later 2008, and I went to her very scared, and I, you know, I asked for a meeting, and I said, "Will you mentor me to do a collection?" You know, and she said, of course, Anya, of course, you know, and that was huge, you know, between her and Diane Hunt, who then also sort of very, you know, took a risk on me to show a collection at Fashion Week, which at the time, if you remember, was a huge event in Trinidad. So their leadership, their mentorship, their generosity of their expertise had a big part to play in how me actually becoming a fashion designer when I really didn't have any formal training, you know?
Yeah, and that's so beautiful that you still recognize the fact that these extraordinary women supported you on that journey and
Absolutely.
opened doors for you. And now that you've, you know, reached such enormous heights, still willing to acknowledge, you know, it was these extraordinary women
Absolutely.
who helped.
1,000%. I mean, I think it's a huge part of what I try to do now,
Yeah.
the other way around. You know, I recognize that small things can have a like gigantic impact on people's lives, you know, and why not? You know, like I read a quote the other day that said basically like, you know, I build networks and I build my community so that I could bring people into it. Otherwise, what is the point? You know? So it's very intentional because I do recognize how much of my life, like these things didn't happen by accident, you know, it's partly I was brave enough to ask for certain help and I was brave enough to put myself in, you know, situations that I really didn't have a lot of experience in. But if they could have easily said no,
Yeah. But then if they said no, then you would have found another path, right?
I
Because you
would have.
made this commitment to this bigger life, and which I think, while born out of devastation, grief, and sadness, was such a beautiful way to honor someone's life, to say, you know what, I promise you that I will live this big life and carry the two of us in it.
Yep, 1,000%. I really, it was devastating and it was a gigantic turning point in my life. I really think that I wasn't awake to the possibilities of life until he died. And my spiritual growth also, like I grew up Catholic. So I was definitely a devout religious person, as many of us are, at least for a certain amount of time, you know, going to convents and going to church every weekend. And so I was, you know, religious in that sense. But to say I understood my spirituality, that didn't happen until he died. And it happened big time after he died. I became much, much more conscious of my sort of the divine gift of being alive, first of all. And in so doing, what do you do with this life? You know, it's not enough. It became not enough to do it halfway.
Yeah. Like, you know, I read this saying a while ago, but it keeps coming back to me about, you know, everybody dies, but not everybody lives. And
Mm-hmm.
and you want to make sure that you live, you know, that you give whatever this time is that we have here, you give it as much of yourself and pour yourself into it and take chances and explore possibilities, and as much as possible have no regrets. And
Yep.
my mom is a final care nurse, and so she, you know,
Mhm.
patients, when she leaves a patient, someone passes and she moves to the next patient. And she said, you know, the thing that you hear from them isn't about the things that they did that they regretted. It's all of the things that they didn't get to do that
Yep.
they regret. And
Yep.
you hear that time and time again, that it's, you know, live.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's lots of statistics about that, but obviously your mom would know directly, but highest percentage of on the deathbed comments are exactly that.
Yeah. So tell me about Project Runway. Like, I mean, this is the thing that I think you are known for globally, right? That
Yes.
everyone saw you battling it out week after week. How did that opportunity even present itself on Project Runway?
So it's very similar type of self-driven, let me just take this chance kind of moment that came from another round of deep sort of, you know, if you remember, I had this scandal, very public scandal in 2009 that happened. So it was like a really kind of back-to-back thing, right? My brother died in 2007. I became Miss Trinidad in 2008. I showed my first collection in 2009. And that same year is when this whole thing happened.
Yeah.
And it took me about a year to really, one, be very angry at life, but two, go very deeply into sort of self-awareness work, you know, inner work. And I actually did this program that my husband, now husband, then partner, did first in Utah called Impact Training. And it's, you know, it's essentially like learning self-love, but in a very intentional way. And out of that, I became really, really conscious of, again, another round of just realizing like I have so much life to live. And so I saw this tweet randomly for the applications to Runway. And, you know, I went through the application. I was like, oh, I can do all these, you know, I could pretty much fill all of this out except for the fact that I can't sew. But that's minor because they're never going to they're never going to call me anyway. So why not? You know, that was really my attitude. I was like, this is a pie in the sky idea, you know, so, but why not? Just
Right.
what do we have to lose, you know? Well, 2 days later, they
No
called.
way. No.
Days later, they called me and I was like, what? What? I was by myself on a train from Toronto to New York. It was a long train. There weren't as many cell phones then. I couldn't call anyone. I was like jumping up and down. Like I did not know what to do. I did not know what to do. And so then I was like, well, I'll go to the first audition, and I took what I had designed, not necessarily sewn. So, there's a little bit of white lie going on here. But, again, I was like, I'm just going to go to the audition for the experience,
Right.
That in itself was so incredible that I was there with all these other contestants or potential contestants, and Tim Gunn was the judge, and
He was
that I
actually
that's where,
there.
yes, by the second one he was there.
Wow.
First one was Mondo, and I was a huge fan of him, and so like I was just died and gone to heaven. I was like, if this ended here, I would have been fine, honestly. And I really thought I would have. I really thought that it wasn't going in. And then it just went on and went on. And when they finally called me to say you're cast, I said, oh no, I can't come. I can't come. It's like you don't understand. I'll apply another time, And again, steps in my mother to say, Anya, this is not gonna happen again. You have
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
just go,
Does not strike twice.
Oh. Thankfully, I listened and I went with the attitude consistently. Like I did not care what happened. I was so
Right.
grateful to be there. I was so alive with the experience. And I genuinely think that's a huge reason I won, because my energy about it was so light.
Yeah.
I was not attached to the outcome. I was so in love with the experience, and I was so grateful for the experience. I felt like I'd really been gifted with this, especially after what had happened only a year before.
Right.
And I was in a terrible stage of my life when that happened, as you can imagine. And I became a social pariah,
Yeah.
So I lost a lot of work. I lost a lot of friends. I lost a lot of social standing. I was still Miss Trinidad when that happened, technically. So you can imagine the fall from grace. And then, but my spirits and my self, I guess, appreciation for who I was had changed drastically because of all of that. And I just went into it with that energy, So yeah, that's basically it. All started with a tweet.
But what's crazy though is that, and it just, you're feeling all of this angst and upset about a violation of your privacy. This
Right.
wasn't something where you were, you know,
No, no,
careless or,
no, not at all. I mean, it was with my boyfriend.
yes,
He's
and somebody violated your privacy by going into your laptop. And it's just, and you are bearing out the repercussions of this thing and having to think about this is how, I have to live a different life because a crime has been committed against me.
totally. Well, you nailed it. I was defiantly full of anger because of that.
Yes.
Because I knew I was the victim of this thing. I knew that I, to your point, hadn't perpetrated a crime against anyone. If
Yeah.
anything, as far as I was concerned, and as far as I know, everybody who watched it was
Right.
in the wrong, because it wasn't for public consumption. But you know what? The biggest lesson I learned out of that is that choosing to be accountable for my role in it. I
Yeah.
was in tapes. It was me. To some degree, there was some level of carelessness, which we of course learned from. And I chose, in a large part due to this work that both Wyatt and I did intentionally, it didn't just happen, deep introspection, to be accountable for that, my role in it. And it shifted everything. I no longer felt, I all of a sudden was able to experience empathy for whomever chose to do. I still don't know, because we decided not to pursue it. I felt a sense of empathy and understanding for all of the really vile things that were said about me. And I also understood that none of it was about me.
Yeah.
None
Yeah.
of that was about me. It was all so much projection of people's fears, of people's belief systems, of people's own pain. And that has been a lesson in my life since then that I continue to carry, because then I owned it and then I was free of it.
Yeah.
And that's what really gave me the space to do Project Runway, because I wasn't carrying any of that anymore.
Yeah.
And people were carrying it. Other people were carrying it. And that really felt freeing.
Did you have to talk to them about it at all on the show?
Yes, I was interviewed about it because I mentioned it in the application. I didn't
Yeah.
want them to find out about it, you
Yeah.
know, and it was
Yeah.
still very fresh. But they were like, by the time they got to know me and my story became this whole story of like I couldn't sew and blah blah blah, that was so much more intriguing to them. And of course, it's the US, right? Like Kim Kardashian already happened, and it just, or maybe not hadn't, but that was not a big deal to them.
Yeah.
Big deal in the Caribbean because of how sort of conservative we are here, but. Yeah, they never used the tape. So
Beautiful.
they never used the interview.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Good. So great. So now you're on Project Runway. So tell us to the extent that you can, because I'm sure you signed multiple NDAs. How much of it is as looks like what you see, and how much of it is very, very different?
So I've done 3 shows, right? But that show, that particular season of Where I Won, was incredibly truthful.
Okay.
And that was really, I think, and I learned this by doing multiple more reality TV shows that had a lot to do with the director and her style of directing and producing reality, and her intentionality around following the true storyline. What's not necessarily what I've now learned as well, and doing reality TV was such a philosophical experience for me, because I realized, like everything else in life, there are many truths to one story.
Yeah.
And even though it was truthful, it was still a version of the story that they decided to edit together, but it was true. I mean, all of it was true. We were mic'd what felt like 24 hours a day. It wasn't, but we felt from the time we woke up until the time we went to sleep, we were mic'd. They followed us around to the bathroom, to wherever we tried to run away. Like we had all these tricks of like how to hide, block the mic. It didn't work. So what they picked up on was all real. But of course, they choose to edit it into the story that they want to tell,
Yeah. And so like for me, especially like Project Runway and those kinds of things, like I'm just like, how are you able to do that in the time that they give you? Like that makes no sense to me.
It's mad. And that was also truthful. I mean, Tim Gunn was not playing around. Like he would boss around all the cameramen. Like the time is up. Like there was no bending the rules. I don't know, man. The human capacity is so much more than sometimes we think, you really can, I mean, okay, to be fair, and especially for me, but generally the clothes weren't always like, rack ready. They were for the runway. Some people like Victor, if you remember him, he was extraordinary from a tailoring perspective. So was Joshua McKinsey, who came second to me. But most of us were like hodgepodging it together just enough to look a certain way for the runway, which is also fine. I mean, I think that happens in real life to some extent too. But yeah, I don't know. You just figure it out because you have to.
Crazy. And my favorite look of that season, by the way, was the Raven. I was just
Oh
like,
my gosh, how do you remember?
blown away. I was just like, oh,
That
blown
is so
away.
nice that you remember that. Amazing. That was my favorite too. And it also showed me that I had a different capacity to design that I did not know until then. And one of the best things about Runway was that, we were sequestered and we had no phones, no access to the outside world, for this initial like 2 months almost, and so as a creative, it was actually like doing a residency and being incubated,
Yeah.
and that was really powerful for my own growth.
Yeah.
I learned so much about what I was capable of doing. I learned from my peers. I learned like how much more sophisticated my design skill could become if I just focused on it, which was evident, I think, in the Raven. By that time, it was far along the competition, and I really pushed myself there, So that was a moment for me as well, for sure.
No, it was subtle and extraordinary, and it looked like a raven with, it was just absolutely mind-blowing.
Amazing.
Absolutely
I'm
mind-blowing.
so amazed you remember that.
It was phenomenal. But, some of this flies in the face of what, like they talk about in manifestation, and like you have to know what you want, and you have to want the thing, and you have to like decide that that's the thing that you want. But also when they talk about how you manifest the life that you want, it is about that gratitude and feeling full.
Yes.
Feeling open to the possibility and enjoying wherever it is you are in that moment, and allowing that to kind of take you to the next step.
So it was both and. So I don't want to misrepresent, because by the time I realized I was in the running, then the competition in me turned on, the competitor. And I used all the tools I knew, and they were very much manifestation tools.
Okay.
The last, right before the finale, when I knew, okay, I had a gigantic inner shift that was huge for me, because I realized that I was sort of subconsciously accepting already that I wouldn't win, right? Which I look back on, and we were sequestered, like very sequestered at that point, separated from all the finalists. And I was in a hotel room for a day with no phone and nothing to do but think and be nervous. And I decided to channel that into all these manifestation tools that I knew. So I literally said to myself in the mirror 16,000 times, I'm winning Project Runway, until I was convinced. I wrote it down. All I had was a little hotel notebook and the pencil. I wrote it over and over. I am winning Project Runway. And in that moment, in those moments, I think the energetic shift happened around my potential to win. And what I realized is that I was accepting the fate of coming, not first, because I had come second my whole life. I came second to the brightest kid in school, always. I mean, I always was very high performing, but for whatever reason, I always came second. I came second in my ballet class exams. I came second in all sorts of things, throughout my childhood. I didn't even clock that until that day in that room, when I was like, I am not coming second.
Yeah.
I deserve to win as much as anyone else, not more than, but as much as, and that changed everything. So I didn't just sort of let it fly the wind at that point. I really was determined to win at that point. And I really felt, because what had happened too is that I was sequestered and I had a break to come home and design the collection. And I realized, like, the Project Runway mania, I didn't know it was happening until then. I was completely unaware, oblivious. I didn't know anybody even knew I was doing it. So far less I came home to this, frenzy. And I was like, well, I have to win now. I can't come back home to Trinidad and I have not won. That's really what motivated me. Like, I was like, it's not going to be enough.
Yeah. So right, because there was this break before the final. And, I will tell you, there are two reasons that I remember this so well. One, I do not watch TV.
Right.
There are two reality shows in my life that I have watched: Project Runway and Tessa and Shin on The Voice. Those are the two reality programs I've watched in the entirety of my life.
Wow.
And I think I'm commitment phobic. And so, like, committing to watch something week after week, it's just too much. But like this, I feel like not just every Trini, but every Caribbean person on the face of the earth was following this week after week, just like, oh my God. And, we could win this. And I think when we realized that not only could we win, but the unlikeliness of somebody from a place as small as ours doing something on this scale, it just was so mind-blowing that you couldn't help but like be sucked in.
Yes, it's just so
like you're vested. You're like, this is, like a friend of mine had joked, and I was like, what if Trinidad had won the World Cup the year we qualified? He's like, it would have been the biggest case of mass alcohol poisoning ever existed. And I was like, and this was like that. It was just like the odds are so heavily weighed against us, but this thing looks like it could happen.
Totally. Yeah. No, you really nailed it. That's really what I felt. And I felt that it was bigger than me, and was bigger than me. And I felt that it was no longer even about me. It was about that, what you just described, like to prove that we are the capacity, we are just as
Yeah.
talented, just as deserving, just as, you know what I mean? Like it was that I was like, I cannot not win. And
Yeah.
I'm not going to let my subconscious, whatever that was, you
Yeah.
know, story I tell myself that I'm good, but I'm not the best, you
Right.
know, affect this moment. And of course, that has also changed my life because I now apply that to everything, you know. So I think as Caribbean people, those are the types of examples that we need in spades because
Yeah.
we are repeatedly made to feel like the whole thing that we're the third world. I mean, these mantras, like they mean something to people. They affect your sense of self, but
Yeah.
that is not the truth. Clearly,
No.
because
No.
when you actually go down the list, look at the number of Caribbean people who have not only been on the stages of the world stages, but have set the tone for them, you know,
Absolutely.
like there is no other and will never be another Bob Marley. You know
No.
what I mean? Like, so why should we be made to feel that we're inferior to anything? You
Any
know?
or anyone.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Was
And
really what drove me.
yeah, and the thing that, the thing that I think blocks many of us and certainly many women is being unwilling to sort of throw your hat in the ring. And even when they called you back and they were like, yeah, 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 you're in. And you're like, no, 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 next time, next time. Backtrack quickly.
Yes.
Realizing that no, this is it. There's not a dress rehearsal. This is
Correct.
your shot. Take it.
Totally. Yes. Windows of opportunity open and close.
Yeah.
And I do think that that's, yeah, I've learned that again. Like it's really, you have to just say yes.
Yeah.
Just say yes.
Yeah.
You know, there's so many, and this is true, and I think this is equally important to say no to things that do not serve you. Um, they say a lot about successful people, like it's because they say no to everything that is not for them, you know?
Yeah.
And I do think choosing in and showing up,
Yeah.
even if you don't think you know, or you can, or like, it doesn't matter. You're gonna figure it out.
Yeah.
Like, and the whole fake it till you make it thing, like it's true. Like you do have the capacity to do, we have that capacity in us.
Yeah. Yeah, and and I also think that there was a lot about that gratitude in the moment and
Mm.
not just focused on, okay, the end is to win, but I am grateful in this moment. I'm learning in this moment. I'm discovering, self-discovering in this moment, and then using that plus this bigger picture, this bigger movement. Oh, I love it. I love it. I love it. I love it. All right, so tell us, since Project Runway and you've designed for Tribe, you've done, I mean, and Lost Tribes, magnificent, magnificent. It's like, and a lot of people are like, oh, it's a beautiful return to where Carnival was. And I'm like, but a lot of Lost Tribe is like things we've never seen before,
Yes.
never even conceptualized. It's a whole different way of executing. So tell us
Yes.
about that experience and what has happened since then?
Well, designing for Carnival, I designed for Tribe for 7 years, and it was a creative stretch for me. Designing costumes is quite different from designing clothes, at least it was for me. But I loved being part of the mass in that way, and I loved participating in the creative energy that happens around Carnival. It's so, sort of contagious, and now that I'm not designing as much for Carnival, I feel the gap, and what I think was most exciting for me was building a brand around Carnival for myself, because it really became this platform for business opportunities that I saw gaps in. So for instance, Monday Wear didn't even exist really yet. But as it started to emerge, I was like, oh, this is interesting. Like there are going to be a lot of designers who can't get into designing the bands, but can still have a customer base,
Yeah.
So said, so done. I mean, it's exploded. It's when I also started to realize that like I could build a brand that could have multifaceted channels, right?
Yeah.
So because I had the same year I started designing for Tribe, I also had my first fete. And I was so into like crafting this whole story around all the different elements of there's a band, there's a fete, there's an e-commerce platform, there's all this merchandise in addition to that. And like, so I think Carnival really was my first foray into designing a business as
Mhm.
opposed to just designing clothes. and being like applying my creativity to business and entrepreneurship. And essentially also the first time I started sort of aggregating my opportunities to offer it to other people. So the Carnival e-commerce platform actually was also because I just couldn't, not just e-commerce platform, all the bands that we designed for throughout the region and in the diaspora cities, I was just getting so many opportunities, as this is right after winning Runway. I couldn't do them all.
Yeah.
But I was like, what if other designers could do it under my brand? So the band still got my name, they still got my brand, but I brought new designers into the fold, you know? And that's what I've continued to do since then, not just with designers, with entrepreneurs. So I have an organization partner with Massey called Nudge Caribbean. And it's essentially that, you know, it's sort of like leveraging access that both Massey and I have collectively for the benefits of now 200 and something entrepreneurs in 3 islands. And with Spool, which is my other social enterprise where we train women how to produce for both the fashion and carnival industry and provide them access to jobs. Just today, they're interviewing with Januras because Januras is looking for staff, and we have trained 90-something women over the last year. And it has been extraordinary to continue to build platforms to provide access to people who don't have it as easily as I have been blessed to have, and to do that at scale. Like, that's really what I've become really excited about doing. And I really think that's why I was given this opportunity to run Project Runway. It didn't feel satisfactory to use it just for my own means, for whatever reason. I do ask myself often why I didn't just focus on me. But I feel much more fulfilled to do this type of work. And it has given me the opportunity to be both an entrepreneur and a creative and a social innovator and very interested in technology and applying that to all of these various things, as you read in the bio. And so yeah, that's a very, very short summary. There were lots of other things in between winning Runway and where I am now, but they kind of have a through line. You know, there's a very simple through line through all of the work that I've done since then.
And I love that. I love that it's about creating opportunities for others and opening up and creating more spaces. And so, you know, and designing this business around all of your passions. And I'm a Nudge customer, by the way. I love
Amazing.
go and I'll buy lotion and I love the products and the earrings and everything else. And that is so important to build that base of entrepreneurs, because we don't have the same ecosystem that the US does that allows you to kind of, you know, get to a particular point of scale before you then can branch and become a big business. And so we have lots of really talented people who are stuck at a particular level or stuck at the stage of an idea, and they can't get to the point of executing on that idea. And we're missing a lot of value in not having that ecosystem. And I think Nudge, part of what it does is helps to provide that.
Yes. No, again, you hit the nail on the head. It's essentially exactly for that purpose. Of course, we continue to refine how we do that. There have been, since COVID, we launched in 2020, many more support networks, which I think is such a sign of what you just said. You know, there's a recognition that from a sustainability of nations perspective, entrepreneurship is a crucial aspect, as you well know, with your own work. And, you know, I think that Massey has been extraordinary to support this type of work and also the way that we do it, because we do not operate like a traditional NGO from the standpoint that it's not a charity, you know. We have really doubled down on the application of design thinking, which again comes from me transferring my skills as a designer, but now to innovation and social impact. And we really focus on being strategic about how we support and putting the entrepreneurs in our community first, from the standpoint that we actually we take a very community-led decision-making approach. All we try to do really is listen to their needs and facilitate the needs with the resources we have. I mean, just to put it simply, but what I think we have done differently from a lot of traditional business service organizations, business support organizations rather, is we don't assume what the needs of the entrepreneurs are. And I think I've experienced that many times in the creative industry, where there's a lot of solution oriented supports that doesn't ever consult the creatives themselves.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know, and you're just wasting time and resources because you need to actually just listen to those for who you're trying to serve because
Yeah.
they know what they need, you
Yeah.
know, and then you solve for that, you know. And so from that perspective, I do think Nudge is quite unique, and I'm very, very proud of the work that we've done.
I am too. And I didn't even know you were behind it. So I'm so happy to know that. And so then about Spool. So, I think there is a movement afoot that will play out, and I think much, much bigger than Carnival, but in sustainability, which is sort of my core work, where
Yes.
you're getting back to the point of needing people, not just mass-produced goods, but more refined, more unique sets, smaller batches of uniquely produced clothes. And so I love this initiative with Spool because then this creates this opportunity to build that base, because we are losing the talent of just being able to sew, right? So now that we can, and hear me,
I love it. You're on board.
so that we're training women. So yeah, I think this is so important, right? To not to lose these lost arts.
Yes.
Because eventually, if we continue to sort of lose this ability to create, we are giving that to somebody else to send back finished goods to us. And it's great for us to be able to design, but it is also great for us to have the ability to produce.
Absolutely. No, it's exactly why my co-founder in that entity is Hassani Watley. He's co-founder of Caesar's Army. And so because of his Carnival background and my fashion background, that's how we really decided that both production for both fashion and Carnival were important to bring home, to continue the legacy of certain skill sets, especially in the Carnival production space. But to your point, in the fashion space too, because one of the downfalls of me winning Project Runway, I think, is that everybody wanted to be a designer, but there's no way you can build an infrastructure. The business of fashion heavily depends on the production side of things, heavily, and so we need the producers, we need the skilled producers, we need, the people for whom producing is their area of genius, and they need to be honored and celebrated just as much. And so that coupled with, one of the things I skipped out is that I founded an organization in 2016 called the Together We Foundation. And we were a collective of all different types of creatives who decided to come together and use this creative skill to shed light and advocate for social issues in the society. So one of the campaigns that did the best was called Leave She Alone, inspired by Calypso Rose's Soca that year with Machel. And it was an anti-gender-based violence campaign. And it was very successful from the standpoint that it went viral. Everybody was wearing the T-shirts and blah, blah. But I was disenchanted with the lack of measurable impact. I didn't know that language back then, but I was frustrated that I didn't know did it work. Not to mention behavior change is probably one of the hardest things to actually accomplish. And so that's where my real commitment to financial empowerment started. Because one of the things I learned out of that experience and like being on the ground with the real activists was that a lot of women, and this is not rocket science, but it became very tangible to me that a lack of financial independence is often a huge part of why you stay in situations, you're vulnerable to situations that you would otherwise find a way out, or avoid, better yet, So my whole mission then became, how do I participate in financial independence, programming? And then it took another however many years to actually put 2 and 2 together. My actual skill is in fashion. Why don't we do livelihood training in the fashion industry? And that's really how it evolved, But what has happened, to your point, is it's been very timely to be a part of the slow fashion movement. And that was not the original intention. My intention with Spool, and still is to build another platform matching makers to consumers.
Right.
Because I've always believed that our tradition of dressmaking, growing up, we didn't have big stores to shop at. So a lot of things got made, Your graduation dress was always made. Sometimes even your uniforms were made, and you always had a seamstress or a granny or an aunt or somebody, But in the big world,
now,
yes, you know, in the larger world, in the more progressive world, that's a luxury. Like, you know, bespoke clothing is a luxury. So I was like, wait, what if you would actually make that more accessible? Everybody wins.
Yeah.
And it does address the issue of having much more carefully selected items in your wardrobe that
Yeah.
you're much less likely to throw away,
Yeah.
and you treasure, and you don't contribute to the landfill.
Yeah.
And to your point, the money stays here.
Yeah.
You know, like, to me, it was just win, 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 all these different, like,
Mhm.
so that's really what birthed school. And then Hassani kind of stepped in and brought the whole carnival aspect to it, which I love. And so that's what that is.
Brilliant. All right. So as we wrap up, then my last question for you is, what is the best advice you've ever received?
This is gonna sound a little out there, but you know, why not?
I'm here for it. I am here for out there. This is what I want.
My brother, when he died, I'm quite sure I heard him say to me, maybe 3 weeks later. My brothers and I were all on the beach in Shodo in Paramin, and I kind of went off on my own, and I sat on this rock, and it was a gorgeous day. You know, it was one of those perfect days. Let me wait for that. And he said to me, Anya, you don't have to wait to die to experience heaven. And I didn't understand what it meant until a couple of years later when I went through that training, and it really kind of, again, you know, it helped me to understand that the only moment we have is now.
Yeah.
The truth is the present. The past is a construct, the future is a construct. And, you know, then I went on to read The Power Is Now by Eckhart Tolle, which is an excellent book. And yeah, just as sort of extremely simple as it sounds, it's to be present.
Yeah.
In the present, everything divine happens.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying I'm good at it all the time. And it takes practice, you know, and ritual and routine and certain things to learn how to really be present. But it was really his invitation to experience the divine in every moment that I think has been the best advice. It's not really advice, even, it's beyond advice, but life-changing learning and wisdom.
Wow. I think that might be mine now. That is extraordinary and absolutely phenomenal. And I've never heard it put that way, but that is exactly that is it. That is the crux of, yeah, heaven is now, to just be in the present moment.
Yeah.
Thank you for this gift.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for staying with us and being here through this extraordinary experience and this journey with Anya. And I can tell you 100% I won't be the same. This is now, like there was before and after COVID. This is now before and after Anya. I'm just like, this is we're in a different space now. But thank you so much for everything that you've shared, and thank you so much for staying with us. And I look forward to seeing you next time.